I think what living well means to me is living in the awareness of our universal interdependence, which for me is a manifestation of um, the unconditional love of the divine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Barry Johnson. Barry is a founding partner and creator of the Polarity Map and Principles. He created the first Polarity Map and set of principles in 1975. Since then, he has been learning and applying polarity thinking with people and organizations all over the world. He continues to explore and promote supplementing or thinking with and thinking to enhance our quality of life on our planet. With humility and pride, Barry is passionate about creating an international community of polarity practitioners who are dedicated to the study and application of polarities in a variety of disciplines and situations. Barry's newest publication, and Volume 1, Foundations, also and Volume 2, Applications, represent what he and his colleagues have learned about and thinking since his first book, Polarity Management, Identifying and Managing Unsolvable Problems, came out in 1992. Barry is an avid outdoorsman and intrepid traveler and brings head and heart together in his teaching and consulting. Barry and his wife Dana have 5 children and 11 grandchildren. Hi, Barry. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for inviting me to this gathering, Broderick.
Awesome. I love that you refer to it as a gathering. It is a gathering. Coming together and to explore and, well, I like to say play, um, and with ideas, exploring what it means to live a life worthy of living. And I really enjoy talking with people who have had a life of experience, such as yourself, trying to make the world a better place. So I'm very much excited to explore with you your views, your life philosophy on what does it mean to have a life worthy of living. So I know I just read that bio, but I like to also ask guests to briefly introduce themselves.
Okay, well, thank you. So I guess the just a quick thing is that I was raised in a small town in northern Wisconsin called Rice Lake, and I thought from age 13 to 26 I was going to be a Lutheran minister and come back to my hometown, which I just loved, small town, about 6,000 people, and I thought that was my life plan. when I left graduated from high school and went off to college, I discovered there was a big wide world out there beyond Rice Lake, Wisconsin, and I ended up going to graduate school at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Spent 5 years living in East Harlem, getting involved in the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement during the war in Vietnam. And in that time, that 5 years in East Harlem, I got to appreciate some of the experience of urban poor and marginalized folks. And it was a real eye opener for me, and it influenced my life from that point forward. And I left seminary because I wanted to. I decided that after all this demonstrating for 5 years, which I did some with Dr. King, I had the privilege of working with him as a part of. I was office manager for clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam, and so that was all of that inspired me a lot. Working with um, the various leaders who were a part of the board of clergy and laity concerned, and uh, and so after that, I decided I didn't want to continue just protesting things that didn't work, and so I wanted to learn about how we might create systems that worked well for everyone, rather than just protesting those that don't. I continue to protest things that aren't working, but my primary investment in time and energy is to help people create systems that work well for everyone. And that's how I got into um, my exploration. I got training as a Gestalt therapist to look at individual change, including my own, and then expanded that out into systems. And it was when I was just graduating from a 2-year training program in Gestalt psychology by the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland that the first Polarity Map occurred in '75. And so since then, when it occurred, it was just with a single patient uh, that I was seeing. The experience we had just shook me to the core because I realized that how she came feeling stuck and she was unstuck. And I realized that the process of her getting unstuck, which ended up being a polarity map, actually would apply to any system, any individual or organization or nation state. And that just took me off into learning about it more and ending up writing about it. And here I am with you.
That's so awesome. A life of activism.
Yeah.
Yeah, starting in a small rural town. I know I like small towns. So I grew up in a small rural town myself.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, going off to a big city and seeing, I mean, you see when you're in a larger environment, well, a large concentration of people,
Yeah.
you really see things that you just like, oh wow, I didn't know it was this bad. You can, think about how people can live in such
Yeah.
squalor in many respects in
Yeah,
certain
my town
cities.
my town was 6,000, and the people on the block I lived on in East Harlem, there were 4,000 just on that block between between First and Second Avenue. So,
Yeah.
but one of the things that I discovered, I was told, now this was 1965, and I was warned by people I shouldn't go to East Harlem. It was dangerous and all that stuff. Not only was it not dangerous, for 5 years, I was never so much as um, being uh, uh, being called a name by anybody or in any way put down. 5 years living in East Harlem. And this is a time when Dr. King was reporting. Dr. King came to a meeting that I was at with him right after he was doing demonstrations for housing in West Chicago. And he said he had never experienced so much hatred and toxicity as he experienced just being there demonstrating for the right for black people to live in that neighborhood. And I
Mm.
thought, what a contrast to me. I've been living here at that time. I'd been living in East Harlem for 3 years, and not only did I not have people sort of you know uh, burning my building or anything like that. It was just none of that. It was amazing, um, the kind of um, actual hospitality that I experienced in East Harlem for the 5 years.
Hmm.
So that was
Yeah.
part of the eye-opening reality.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Small town folks go out into a big city. That's a
Yeah,
it's definitely a shocker. It was for me at least.
yeah,
And yeah, a life of service. You've dedicated yourself to essentially trying to make the world a better place. Working with individuals and psychotherapy, and well, I like how you said also working on yourself and then extending that to others individually, and then this work with systems and society as a whole. That's beautiful. I'm sure some of that will come up as we dig further into our conversation here.
yeah.
Um, so I like to start in the beginning, and then we can just unpack it and play and see what happens
Okay.
with the rest of the conversation. So, what does living well mean to you, or what is a life worthy of living?
Well, I think what living well means to me is living in the awareness of our universal interdependence, which for me is a manifestation of um, the unconditional love of the divine, whether we call that divine God or goddess or the Great Spirit. But there is an unconditional love context in which I live, and I think we all live. And one of the key manifestations of that is our universal interdependence. And so that awareness living in that awareness is what it means for me, in summation, to live well. It's easy to lose track of that awareness, but I think some form of daily meditation and action can help keep you centered in that awareness. But that's the most important thing about that. It's at the heart of what I would see as a good life. When I think of other things, there's celebrating the uniqueness of everything, including me. Another way to say this is it's like celebrating the fact that everything is unique. You, Broderick, and me are each unique, and everything is connected. And I just that just supports me in working with anybody, because I know coming into the conversation with you that we're connected, we're unique, we're different, but we're also connected, and both of us are loved. And I know that going in. I don't have to. I don't have to interview you to figure that out. I don't have to do. I don't have that. It's like I know that going in, and so it's just a matter of my in conversation with you being able to appreciate that and keep in touch with that and just discover what your uniqueness is, and appreciate it, and what our connectedness is. It's a given reality, and the question is, how can I experience that with you more completely than just the understanding that it's true, but how do I experience it as true with you? So this conversation is a good example of that. It's kind of happening right now. Another thing that I think is important for a good life for me is being able to hold myself and others accountable for our actions and inactions. At the same time, um, loving myself and others as we are, warts and all. So it would be, how do I, in this conversation even, hold myself and you accountable on the one hand, and on the other hand, just loving me and you, uh, given our mistakes, our miscues, whatever foibles might show up in the middle of this conversation. There's just knowing that, for example, what this works at is on the one hand, in terms of the accountability, it's like if somebody is bullying somebody else, I feel an obligation to stand up against the bullying, to say that's got to stop. But how I treat the person who's bullying is as somebody who is loved by the divine, can be loved by me if I had the capacity, and is more than the bullying that I'm seeing, that I'm trying to stop. That there's a whole person who there is loved there. And one of my mentors, Jack Gibb, said if we can see an individual or an organization or a country completely, love is just a natural byproduct of that ability to see. And that has informed my work in terms of looking at a polarity lens, because what a polarity lens does for me, Broderick, is that it helps me see another person more completely. And I'm intentionally looking for the more, because the quest is for uh, the enhancement of the capacity to love by seeing them more completely. So some people are easier for me to see and to love than others. But that is a reflection of my capacity more than it is the other person. so it's like, if I find myself having trouble, really being frustrated with somebody, it's helpful to recognize that could easily be me. I mean, I could easily be that person. Just all I'd have to appreciate is what their life experience was like, and I would just understand, well, that's how they got to where they are, being the person that I'm finding having frustration with. So first of all, it's acknowledging that could be me, and the second is that what I'm frustrated about is it's unfair and dehumanizing to see them only as the part of them that's frustrating to me. And so the quest is to see them completely, and I know what that result will be. It's a great result, and that is I would love them if I could see them. So,
Mm.
and a polarity map, a polarity lens helps me do that. I think it's a support. It supports me in trying that both with my country or with an organization I'm consulting with. I walk into an organization, and my assumption is if I could see that organization completely, I just love that organization. And I don't care if the organization is the Ku Klux Klan or whether it's the U.S. military. I've worked with the U.S. military a lot, or it's a mom and pop shop that I'm just trying to help them, figure out how to make a living for their family with their shop. Doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely beautiful. Very, a lot of wisdom in what you just said there. I mean, a lot. Yeah, it warms my heart because I have a very, very, very similar view that you have. And I want to unpack that a little bit more. I want to
Yeah.
see how you've come to see things this way and the things that have influenced your thinking. And I want to start here in the beginning. Because I mean, this is really meaningful for me, at least. But I want to highlight it. I guess I'm biased in
Yeah.
wanting to highlight this, but how you view this this interdependency
Uh-huh.
and this view that everything is divine. Um, can you say a little bit more about the divine nature thing? What do you mean by that? And where do you think that came from in you?
Um, well, um, remember when I introduced my brief history, I said from 13 to 26, I wanted to be a Lutheran minister. Well, at the same time, at this age 13, um, the church I was raised in was a very conservative Lutheran church, and the minister there made it very clear. He said that God loves all of us, and it's all we have to do is believe it, and then we'll be saved. And if we don't believe it, then we're going to hell. And so I had this anxiety about. I didn't feel safe. I mean, I thought, well, I'm supposed to believe, so I can say I believe, but I wasn't feeling safe. I would say it right. So and it dawned on me that this was actually it's like you can't be saved by your actions, but you want me to believe, which is a type of action. So I'm sort of caught here, and I wanted to be good. I wanted to be cared about people, wanted to be saved. So I thought I want to be a minister, and then I started being attracted to young girls. And there's there's a piece in the New Testament which says if your eyes cause you to sin, it's better to pluck out your eyes um, in order to and enter the kingdom of heaven than to go to hell with your sight. Right? That's the gist of it. And when I became aware of being attracted to young girls, I thought that's lust. So I saw it as just straight up evil. So I'm thinking now I'm this kid who's afraid of being evil and of going to hell, and it preoccupied me. And so I didn't know what to do about that, and I was anxious about it uh, for um, for 3 years. And I went to this Lutheran church camp in which one of these fireside chats where one of the counselors gives a kind of a little sermon or whatever by the campfire. It my first awareness of grace showed up there, and became aware as he was talking that I was somehow loved, even though I had this attraction to young girls. Um, and so I hadn't even broken out the attraction as being something natural and okay. I hadn't broken that even out yet, but I was saying God loves me even though, and I got really excited then. I thought, oh, this is the message I need to take to the world. That's now reinforces my desire to be a minister. So I'm 16. So I'm graduating from college now. I went to Luther College for 2 years, and then I went to to Wisconsin State University, Eau Claire, and I was the president of the Lutheran Student Association. And oops, sorry, I just bumped my screen here. And I was also a youth minister at, not a youth minister, but a youth worker at a local Lutheran church. And I was just graduating. It was in my last semester of school, and I realized, and now I would call it a mystical awareness. I wouldn't use that term until the last few years, actually. But it wasn't something that I thought, well, this is what needs to be true. It wasn't a rational argument. It was an awareness that just hit me. I thought, actually, the implications of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection um, uh, are that everybody is saved. When we say God loves everybody, we mean everybody is saved. Nobody's going to hell. That just shook me. And so I shifted from being the individualized notion about just concerned about me, but I was raising questions as I was going to college. What about Muslims? What about Jews? What about Hindus? What about people who never hear any of this? Um, and it just hit me that actually, what it means is that the divine, whatever we call him, her, or it, or Yahweh, does not matter. That the divine presence is that everybody is loved regardless. Um, and and so where we are headed, life is headed towards life. Uh, and so I wrote a small book called All. And I was just moving to New York City to be a part of this internship program at Union Seminary in East Harlem. And so I wrote this small book called All, and that was the message. And and so that's 1965, and so that's 60 years ago. And then 50 years ago, I came across. As I was in the Gestalt training, I got in touch with the Polarity Map and Infinity Loop, and that I saw how that related to systems and to system interdependence. And so the I wrote a book in '65 called All, and then I wrote a book in '70, or in 2020. I wrote a book that was called And. So those are bookends. There's All, and as a naive young, just sort of practical mystic, not even knowing the term at that time, and appreciating the fact that what I was learning in my work with organizations and with nations, and consulting with governments, um, is about this universal interdependence. And that was in fact a manifestation of what I had just naively come across in my own, in my own body and my own awareness when I wrote the book All. So that's where it came from.
So beautiful, Barry. I think it's so important to in this conversation at least to preface that, because for me personally, I feel like that's foundational to a good life as well. That and having an audience here, like, how do different people come across that idea, that notion? And for a lot of folks, it's through experience, it's through an awareness. It could be a subtle experience.
Yeah.
Of course, it can be intellectual. I can intellectualize the interdependency and how we're all an expression of the same, but I don't have to refer to it as divine. And I think I like to use the term divine because it points to something.
Mm-hmm.
It points to something sacred. It points to something that's connected to ultimately love, the language that I like to use.
Uh huh.
Um, it points to that interdependency. It points to responsibility that we have for each other. Um, yeah, I think it's so important. And sometimes in today's age, a lot of people are opposed to various religious traditions for good reasons, actually.
Sure.
But we don't have to. We can keep the baby and throw out the bathwater.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of beauty in there, and religious traditions. I grew up Southern Baptist, for instance, and I loved it, man.
Yeah.
The power and the spirit of that. And I wanted to be a preacher too, or at least everyone thought I was going to be a preacher. I wanted to be in the church some
Yeah.
way, somehow,
Sure.
deacon or something.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, because it was powerful. Now, we can definitely look at there are a lot of problematic aspects of religious traditions,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people involved in those traditions who are genuinely in love with the divine, or genuinely humbled by this notion that there is something in this universe that holds us all. I love your language, that loves us, that
Yeah.
feels there's a resonance between me and a power or energy or whatever term one wants to use that's much greater than myself, and it includes everyone. It includes everything, and that's powerful
Yeah.
foundation for thinking about what a good life is.
Yeah. And I wrote a book with Roy Oswald called Managing Polarities in Congregations, and there's two sort of levels to that. The transactional side is one, um, uh, but the on the transformational side of theology, I think what happens in congregations like my very conservative Lutheran church and possibly in your church, it happens in virtually every faith tradition. There's an underlying polarity about justice and mercy.
Mm.
Um, and and so you've got the Ten Commandments, for example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So all communities need some agreements that we're going to live by. So we need those agreements, and that's important in order to ensure some kind of justice or fairness. And we're all going to find ourselves falling short, and so in that dimension, what we need is mercy. Like Desmond Tutu's book, No Future Without Forgiveness, is talking
Mm-hmm.
about the need, while we're challenging apartheid in South Africa, we need to hold on to forgiveness, thus the truth and reconciliation process, um, to help South Africa, reconcile itself after the ending of apartheid. And what happens is when we all approach justice and mercy from an either or mindset, a lot is just unconscious. It comes from the way all of us are taught to spell and to write, and we learn about our culture and math and science. We all learn to differentiate different things from each other. That differentiation process, and we all learn that there's laws we need to have, etc. But if we end up focusing on justice in a church to the neglect of mercy, it leads to self-righteous indignation.
Yeah.
And and it doesn't mean that the person is somehow the one with the self-righteous indignation is somehow evil, but that person has um, does not have the support of experiencing a level of being loved that allows them to share it with the person that they are abusing. So, for example, if we looked at this as a polarity, when we look at laws, we can say that, well, laws are good and necessary. And the assumption is this: we have this linear thinking assumption here, which we all come by naturally. Well, if some laws are good, more laws are going to be better, right? So this leads to more and more laws. The other reality about laws is that if laws without consequences don't have much impact on people, right? So
Mm.
if you can break the law and nobody cares, then the law has no meaning. So the reality is that laws without consequences are meaningless, so we need to have consequences. Now, there's another linear assumption that goes off from that. Well, if some consequences are effective, harsher consequences will be better. right? So what do we have? We have this dual track here, just heading down to the disaster, which is we have more and more laws, and we're going to have harsher and harsher consequences. Now, what does that look like in real life, even today? It looks like stoning a woman to death for being identified as being pregnant out of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, that is a very evil result. That is um, that is killing a loved one um, who deserves to be loved, who deserves to be forgiven to the degree that she has fallen outside of the law. But instead of being loved and being forgiven, being held accountable in some way, but instead of being loved and forgiven in the midst of the accountability, she is stoned to death with actually self righteous indignation and
Mm-hmm.
even cheering. Now, how did we get there? And I'm suggesting that the way we got there is that we brought either or thinking to the dual message within all religious systems is we need to be accountable and loved. We need justice and mercy. And if we just go down the mercy track without the love track, I mean, just go down the justice track without the mercy track uh, to support us and others, we get overwhelmed with our own guilt because we know shit we do that is not acceptable, and we tend to, the more guilty we feel, the more likely we are to project what we can't own on somebody else, like this woman you know, who we stone. And notice that in the stories of the stoning, when Jesus was at one of those stoning events, um, um, he said, "Well, let the one who was without any sin cast the first stone." And it caused enough of a pause for people to say essentially to themselves, "That could be me," and the stoning stops. So so it's such there's a challenge there that's happening. Okay, well, let those who are without any, who are pure, you go ahead and throw the stones, and nobody could throw them. So that's what I think we do when we bring a polarity mindset to occasion. We bring an effort to bring both justice and mercy to the organization, to the person we're coaching, or to the country. Um, and this was very important when I was working, being opposed to the war in Vietnam. I mean, I had a good friend who was in the East Harlem internship program. We were there studying the program in East Harlem together, um, and he he decided that the war in Vietnam was a just cause, that he saw it as a need to stand up and stop communism, and that he was willing to do that. Um, I thought it was not a just cause. It was an illegal war. So we had different interpretations of the war. But Russ went there, a good friend of mine, went there, was killed in Vietnam. His wife asked me to speak at his funeral as somebody who was the office manager for clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam. And it, and so the the need was to be able to disagree with Russ and love him, and speak lovingly at his funeral uh, to his wife and family, um, and um, and also to continue to stand against the war. Um, and that combination, that's a combination of justice and mercy, or law and grace, whatever you call it. I was at the Parliament of World Religions doing some work there with them a number of years ago, and I mentioned this in my book that I saw a Buddhist monk, it was walking towards me, and I was doing research for my book as a part of this. And I said to him, we just sort of greeted each other, and I said, I come from a Christian tradition in which we've got this dual message. Some version of justice and mercy or law and grace that on the one hand, we're accountable for our actions, and on the other hand, we have uh, this wonderful benefit of unconditional love of the divine. Uh, and I said, now, is there a parallel within Buddhism? He was a Tibetan Buddhist, and he smiled at me, just sort of bowed, and he laid his two hands out, and he put one hand out. And he said, yes, on the one hand, we have an all-loving God, and on the other hand, we have karma. And And I was just so struck by how quickly and easily he was able to. It was like, well, of course. and so I just loved the ease with which both of us were just saying the same thing, coming out of different traditions. Um, and yeah, it's like, okay, yep, that's the heart of it.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love how you. I was gonna ask you a little bit more about love, and you just delve into it with those examples. That was all just really beautifully said. Um, yeah. Can you say a little bit more about the link between seeing everything as an expression of the divine and this concept, this idea of love? Can you unpack what love means to you and why it's important to love? Because in the beginning you mentioned something about to really see is to love. You
Mm-hmm.
can see the Ku Klux Klan and still love them. You can see, I forgot another example that you use, but you can see different things, different groups and populations of people that you may disagree with,
Mm-hmm.
but you can still love them. And I think there's something, because I agree with you, but I want the audience to. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to think about it and say about what love is for you. But I want the audience to really hear this, especially in these times where we feel like we can't love each other because we're different. So yeah, can you say a little bit more about love and why it's
Um,
important?
well, I think that Jack Gibb was right, and I keep sort of learning about that when he said if you could see somebody completely, love would be the natural result. And I've just found that to be true. I've found myself um, that in getting to meet somebody, as I see them more completely, love just continues to emerge, and and I and I'm able to see them. I don't have to pretend that I like everything they're doing. I don't have to. Um, this love is not just some sort of simple thing. There's a kind of discipline and work involved in it, I believe, and it is looking deeply into yourself and finding letting yourself be. This is where I think meditation can be so useful because you're not trying to achieve anything, you're not trying to gain any goals, just letting yourself be in the moment. And I think in those moments that sometimes that's one way at least to make available that awareness of wow, I'm right here and now. I'm okay just as I am. I don't have to prove myself to anybody, including me. Um, I can just be me in that moment. And I think letting ourselves have moments in which we can just let ourselves be supports us in letting other people just be. And what I mean by that is being is not just letting myself be as if I'm perfect, just letting myself be as somebody who is is again and again finding myself doing things I'm not proud of, making mistakes, harming people unintentionally. The impact, my intent might be good, my impact is a disaster. And so, what for me, it's about it incorporates all of that. It incorporates loving my country, even as I'm trying to stop the war in Vietnam, and which was true. I was very clear that I then and now that I love my country, and I understand. I was talking with a good friend, Michael Buchmann in Germany. Um, I was I was talking with him about stacking polarities. I can remember we were sitting in a car together, and I was in the driver's seat, and I was using my hands, and he knew about polarity thinking. He works with intercultural studies, the relationships between different nation states, and different cultures. The Hofstadter research on cultures describes 7 polarities. And he got it when we met in Mexico, both of us presenting, and I was sharing about polarities, and he said, "Oh, that's what I do. I talk about 7 polarities." He didn't use those words, but he was talking about interdependencies between national cultures, like individualism and collectivism is a natural national culture, and it's a polarity, right? So we had this history of working with each other. He brought me to Germany to share some of Polarity Lens in terms of intercultural management. And anyway, I was saying to him that as I've been evolving with this, I was talking about stacking polarities. And so if you can stack one polarity, if it's mismanaged, it becomes dysfunctional. But if that lands on another polarity that's also mismanaged, that stack can get more and more problematic. And I talked through the steps that could lead to the rise of the Third Reich, and just showing how it's like how could a culture, and I had questions when I was growing up, because when I was aware of this is a young kid now. I'm in my teens, and I was aware of the Third Reich and the killing of Jews in concentration camps, and this disaster. And I thought, how could that happen in Germany, which is the home of the Lutheran Church, in which I'd been raised, right? So I had this contrast between the Lutheran Church home office and home, and Martin Luther being German. And I thought, well, how the hell could that happen? But I understood it from a polarity perspective as I was growing into this. I thought it became clearer and clearer. This is how this can happen. All you have to do is treat a collection of polarities as if one pole can be chosen over the other, and it leads to the Third Reich, and it leads to our unbelievable cruelty to each other. And as I get finished sharing this with him, I'm looking ahead as I'm explaining this, which I often do. I close my eyes and I think about, and I'm using my hands and everything, and I look over at Michael, and he's in tears. And I said, "Michael," I said, "what's going on?" And he said, um, "This is the first time in my life that I've heard somebody describe the whole creation of the Third Reich and the kind of evil that my grandparents were involved in, and my parents were involved in a way that dismissed the possibility that we're just inherently evil." Um, and and I got really appreciative of how painful it has to be, that where we in the United States celebrate our victory of World War II, and um, and Germans are living with a history that the world agrees was a very inhuman, um, cruel moment in the history of, of the German country. Um, and to live with that and um, to wonder about, you know, here, I think it's I've since I got more more appreciation for not being too self-righteous when I was experiencing what we were doing in Vietnam and the history of our own country around racism in our country. Um, um, the So it's like um, there's no space once you own your own history, um, uh, and being loved in spite of it. Um, there's no space for me, at least, to be self-righteous towards Germans or anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that what a polarity lens does is it helps us take a look at that. How did that happen? How did that happen? Um, and it's a way to get in touch with how it could happen, how I could be a part of that if I were there. Um, and it's amazing how much of it is based on the either or thinking that we come by naturally to the absence of the benefit of both and thinking.
Yeah.
Um, and so just to build on that for a second, um, one of the problems with um, our addressing evil in the world, whatever we identify as evil. I mean, I would say poverty, racism, sexism, the destroying of our environment are all evil results. When we see what we might consider evil results, we make the assumption that we have to find an evil source to destroy or lock up. So, and there's a logic to that. Well, if you've got these evil results, then you have to find the evil people or the evil country or the evil somebody. You find them and then you destroy them. Um, and an example of this is when you was watching when I was at Luther College. I was watching a movie in the theater, small town, Decorah, Iowa. I was in a small town watching this movie, and it was called The Guns of Navarone. And in the movie, the whole plot of the movie was an attempt to. There were some guns that were embedded in the hillside, in cliffs. They were embedded in there. The guns that were able to shoot from inside these caves that were dug out. They had these huge guns that were shooting out and could hit U.S. ships as we were attempting to land on some island as a part of retaking of winning the war in World War II. And so there was this whole struggle. And at the end of this struggle, and again, in the name of protecting our ships, all of this very understandable. In the name of protecting the ships, there were men got into those caves and were able to trigger explosives that were blowing up the caves and blowing up everybody who was in it. And the final show in the movie, the final picture, or next to the final picture, was essentially these caves being blown up, and people, German soldiers, were just being torn, flying all over. So it's a very dramatic explosion with bodies going everywhere, and the audience erupted in applause.
Mm.
And I was just shook by it. I thought we're applauding all these people just being killed, and Um, Now, how did we arrive there? And so, it's understandable. So let me just back up a second. So, um, the all of us, all of us, when we see like a James Bond movie or another movie, at the front end of the movie, we see some kind of cruelty, and some kind of a cruel person that gets identified. There's a cruel, there's some real cruelty happening. And the more cruel the front end of the movie is, the more cruel you have set the audience up to be willing to tolerate at the end of the movie. And so, when you have this, uh, cruelty, um, what you set out to do is you get on a quest, which is a righteous quest. And this righteous quest is to find out who did this and stop them and put them in jail or kill them. And you can do that with self-righteous indignation. Now, I'm suggesting that there is evil in the world, but and there are evil results, but there is no evil source. The assumption that there's an evil source and that the quest is to find it and destroy it or put it in jail or whatever, that whole quest is dehumanizing to the person who's on the quest, and it's dehumanizing to whoever's found. Because whoever gets found now, we feel some legitimacy to destroy them, to kill them, to treat them as cruelly as they were treating others in the front end of the movie, right? So, so that's our right to do, and I'm suggesting that there is no evil source for those evil results. All you have to do to create evil in the world is to misdiagnose a polarity as a problem to solve. Polarities have two goods in them, two upsides. And if you pursue one of those goods to the neglect of the other good, it becomes cruel. So it's not that the good you're pursuing is not a legitimate good. It's like when you pursue it to the neglect of the other good, that is where evil comes from in our life, right? Like pursuing laws without mercy, leading to stoning a woman to death. How did we get there? Not because laws are bad, but because we pursued laws, we pursued justice, which is a good thing. Law and justice is a good thing, but we pursue it to the neglect of mercy, it becomes a bad thing. So there's the people who are doing that, they're not evil. The pursuers aren't evil. The people they're identifying as evil are not evil. Nobody's evil in that equation, but a lot of painful stuff happens. And we need to be forgiving of the pursuers and the pursued in that process. But it is dehumanizing, and it's part of what shows up when we're say just even being someone who's wanting to fight against racism. Racism and inequitable treatment, abusive treatment of people based on color, based on race. That is an evil result, and those who are doing it need to be stopped. And so I think it is important that we be opposed to racism. But the problem I have with the notion of being anti-racist is that it assumes we can identify somebody different than us who's a racist, and that they then are we're in a quest to find them. So we're looking at everybody. In my being an anti-racist, what am I doing? I'm going around hunting racists. And as if I weren't one, first of all. So I mean, it's like there's no ownership of my own racism involved in this. I'm just trying to find those who are. So it becomes a legitimate way for me to disown my own racism and just put it on some other white guy, and say, well, you're a racist, and I'm holding you accountable for being a racist. Now, labeling that person a racist is dehumanizing to you and to them, because they may be doing racist acts, acts of racism, let's put it that way. They may be doing acts of racism, which I need to stand up against in terms of my conviction system. I need to stand up against acts of racism. Um, but I also need to see the person who's doing the acts of racism is more than those acts of racism. If I can't do that, I'm dehumanizing them and I'm dehumanizing me. Um, uh, and so, um, so that's, and a polarity lens can help us do that.
Mm-hmm. I love it. You're basically encouraging us to be complex thinkers. You're encouraging us to be a little more nuanced. And polarity is looking at stacking various polarities in a particular situation is one way of doing that. It's saying that there are polar sides or opposites to every situation. And how do we look at them? How do we see the upsides to these various things and also see the downsides? It requires a certain level of awareness and sensitivity and willingness and openness to doing that. And I think it starts with what you said from the very beginning is that we're all an expression of the divine. What behaviors or actions are we engaged in that are not loving? Where
Mm-hmm.
did that come from? That came from some form of conditioning. That conditioning could have started in the womb. Some people are born with various neurological dysfunctions because of, say, I don't know, say a parent was an alcoholic or abusive of some particular substance that caused neurological harm,
Yeah.
that created a tendency for someone to behave in a particular way. Only the tendency. But what is in our society that nurtured and supported that particular tendency, that supported a person who has a psychopathic tendency to become a psychopath?
Yeah.
And I think that the reason, or to engage in psychopathic actions, how did that happen? You're asking us, I think, the way what I'm hearing, how did that happen? And that's not judged so quickly. We do need to make an assessment like that behavior is inappropriate. That's appropriate judgment. But to take a little deeper look, are they just a racist? Is that person just a racist and that's it? That defines who they are? No, where did it come from? There is more to that person. And trying to understand that. And if you want to resolve this use of racist behavior, someone engaged in racist behavior, you have to have a nuance look at it and try to resolve the issue. Because if not, what are you going to do? Are you just going to eliminate the person? Is
Yeah.
that what we have to do? Is that like, okay, either it's either or thinking, like you
Yeah.
said. All right, I'm just going to eliminate you, and you're like, no, I'm going to eliminate you, and this is what we get. We get barbarism and
Yeah.
all manner of evil as a result of that because we refuse to engage in this polarity thinking that you're suggesting. But
Yeah.
I think that refusal comes out of this notion that we've been indoctrinated that the world, reality, nature is either or. It's pure competition. There are pure winners and losers,
Yeah.
and there isn't any space for thinking in polarities like you're saying, and trying to resolve issues using polarity thinking the way that you've mapped that out
Yeah.
because we don't have the foundational viewpoint that there is interdependency, that we are all an expression of the divine, or we are all an expression of the same thing, then there's something sacred about that. We don't have it. I have it, but a lot of people do not have that. So they're
Yeah.
not even willing to see the other person as something other than less than human.
Yeah. I think there's a couple things, and then I need to finish up here because I've got another commitment. But uh, one thing is that either or thinking and both and thinking are themselves a polarity. So we need to be able to do both, right? So
Yeah.
it's not about letting go of either or thinking. It's about paying attention to um, in which context do we use either or thinking, and when do we use both and thinking. And so it's the ability to move back and forth. this is an either or choice. Who do we elect for this office? Well, is this person or this? So there's a lot of either or choices we have in life, which are important. And then there are things that, if they're a polarity, then we need both and thinking. And if we misdiagnose a situation and see it as an either or, when it's more accurately identified as a both and, then we get in trouble, a lot of trouble. And it doesn't make us a bad person, but it can have very bad results.
Exactly. This has been great, Barry. I know that we are coming to a close now with the amount of time that we have. I mean, there's things that we didn't really touch on that I thought was important that you said earlier about we are all unique, and it's great to celebrate our uniqueness. And we can have you come back on the podcast. We can unpack that one a little bit more. And I'm
Sure.
glad you just mentioned this thing about there's a space for either or thinking. There's a space for solving problems, but there's also a space for and thinking.
Yeah.
And that's a way we can solve problems as well with and thinking. And then you also mentioned accountability. I think you talked about the importance and relevance of accountability.
Yeah.
With the examples that you gave, you didn't say using polarity thinking to excuse behavior. You said, no, we need to be held accountable for our behaviors that are not loving ultimately. But we also need to think about it with a little bit more nuance and complexity in the process. So, any final words that you have for the audience before we sign off here?
Well, maybe just to, if you could get my book if you're interested, but I think just the beginning or ending where we began, and that is just to let you know that from my perception, that whoever is listening to this, you're a part of our universal interdependence, and you are unconditionally loved by the divine. And that's a message I hope that will come to you and fill your heart and mind, and know that you're blessed.
Awesome. This has been very special to me, Barry. I think that I look forward to us doing this again. I would love to have you back on and really just dig into polarity thinking. And I think what you're doing is beautiful. I think it's great. You've been doing it a long time, and
Yeah.
it's well practiced for you. You've greased it up really well there. And but I would love for you to come back and let's unpack this a little bit more. So
I'd be
thank you so
glad to
much for
do it.
being here.
I'd be glad to do it. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.